Okay, so we're going to go ahead now and begin with 2.1. And chapter 2 is graphing. Okay, so we're going to be looking at how to graph lines, how to plot points, and how to build equations. So the first thing we're going to look at is 2.1. And there's not a lot in 2.1. 2.1 is a very small section. A lot of it should be review, but there's one part that is brand new. So we're going to go ahead and look at 2.1. You're welcome. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead now and look at 2.1, and we're going to discuss ordered pairs. So we're going to talk about what ordered pairs are, how to graph and plot points, and how to use those points to find the midpoint. So we're going to begin by talking about ordered pairs. Now, ordered pairs always go x, y. So ordered pairs are always x, comma, y. This is in 2-dimension. We got up, down, left, and right. If it was 3-dimension, you'd have an ordered triplet. And you don't really talk about ordered triplets much unless you take a calculus course. Okay, so we're going to be working only with ordered pairs in this course in college algebra. So ordered pairs always go x first, comma, y. When we go to graph them, we put them on the coordinate system, or also called the Cartesian plane. Right here is 0, 0, and this is the origin. Okay, so 0, 0 is the origin. When we look at it, we have x that goes left and right, and y that goes up and down. Now the x is like we've done before. When it goes to the right, it's positive. When it goes back to the left, it's negative. So going to the right is a positive x. Going back to the left is a negative x. Up and down is the same thing. If you go up, it's positive y. If you go down, it is negative y. Okay, and this is called the Cartesian plane. Now what we're going to look at is how to quickly go through these and plot some points. And then we'll learn how to graph lines by finding points. So let's just go through a couple of these, and we're going to plot some points, plot some ordered pairs. So we're going to plot the following. Let's plot 3, 8, minus 1, minus 3. How about 0, negative 4, and 1, comma 0. So we're going to go ahead and plot these points. Now when we plot them, we don't connect them together. Okay, so when I say plot, that means we put a dot where they belong. If I say graph, that means I connect them together with a line or a curve. So graph means they connect together. Plot just simply means we put a dot where they belong. So when I say graph the line, that means we're going to connect them together, connect the points together. If I say plot, that means you put a dot where they belong and label them. So let's begin with our first one, which is 3, 8. What goes first? Well, the x goes first, y is second. So 3, 8 would mean we go over 3 and up 8. So 3, 8 is right here. Now, when you look at your homework, in your homework, you've got graphs for all the problems that require you to plot points and graph lines. So you already have the grid that you can use. So you won't have to worry about trying to use any graph paper. It's already in the questions that need it. The next one is minus 1, minus 3. So that is back 1 and down 3. Then we've got 0, 4. So that's at 0 and down 4. So 0, -4 would be right about there. And then finally we've got 1, 0. So 1, 0 means we go over 1 and don't go up any. So 1, 0 would be here. Okay? So that's how we plot points. Now we did not connect them together. Okay? These did not get connected together. We said plot. When we say graph, that means we connect them together. How can we graph a line? Well, we can graph a line by connecting 2 points together. So you need at least 2 different points to graph a line. There's other ways that we'll learn about in later sections on how to graph these. But in this section, we're going to make tables, get ordered pairs, and graph the line. Okay, so I'm going to give you a partially completed table, and you're going to use this to graph the line. So we'll just come up with some numbers here. How about we use, and let's see, how about we use a -4. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and complete this table and then graph the line. So you'll notice we've got partially completed table. We've got values, we've got to fill these in. And we need at least 2 points to graph a line. You can have more, but you have to have at least 2, minimum of 2. If you want to have 3 or 4 different points, you can do that, but you've got to have a minimum of at least 2. So let's start with the first one. So what do we know on our first part? We know x is 0. And if we use x equals 0, we plug it in. So that gives you y equals now 3 times 0 minus 4. 3 times 0 is 0. So that means then y equals a -4. And that's our first ordered pair, which is now 0, -4. Okay? We need another one. Well, we've got one blank left to fill in. So we'll go ahead and fill this one in. How do we fill in the next one? The next one, what do we have? We have y is a -4. Okay, and if y is a -4, what is that going to then give you for x? I should have picked a different value. Okay, if I pick y equals -4, and I plug -4 in, I get -4 equals 3 times x minus 4. Okay, and we can solve this, right? We can add 4 to each side. And what does that then leave you with? That leaves you then with 3x equals what? 0. Okay. Divide by our 3. And now we have x equals what? 0. That's not going to let us graph this line. Why not? Okay, to graph a line, what do we need? We have to have what? 2 different points. Okay, these are the same. So we need another one. So let's add on another one. Let's plug in x equals 3. And you may get a fraction. If you get a fraction, when you go to graph these, what you do is you approximate where it's at. So let's add on another one, because we have to have at least 2 different points. If you end up with 2 of the same points, add another one. Okay, so let's add in x equals 3. And if I add in x equals 3, that gives you y equals now 3 times 3 minus 4. 3 times 3 is 9. And 9 minus 4 is a 5. So that's what we've got there. So what's our value going to be here in our new blank? 5. Now, do we have at least 2 different points? Yes. If that would have came out to be a fraction, we would use the decimal approximation to kind of figure out where to plot the point. See, these came out to be whole numbers and we're fine. But what are our 2 different points? Okay, we work these out. We've got our 2 points. What are our 2 points? 2 different points. We've got 0, -4, and we've got 3, 5. Now, once you have the 2 different points, what do you now do? You want to graph them, so that means we plot them, and we connect them together. So we have 0, -4. That's at 0 on the x-axis, and down 4. Remember, they go x, y. So down 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's going to put our first point right there. 0, -4. Our next one is at 3, 5. So that's over 3. And up 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, do we have 2 different points? At least 2 different points? Yes, if you have at least 2 different points, then you can graph the line by connecting them together. So there's a couple of problems where you have to complete a table. And what you do is you complete the table. And then you plot your points and connect them together to graph your line equation. Okay, so that's how you graph a line, by completing a table. Let's do another one where we graph the line, and we're going to find the intercepts. So we need to talk about what intercepts are. So I'm going to visually show you what intercepts are in terms of the graph first. So when we talk about intercepts, the intercepts are going to be where our graph touches the axis. So you've got an x-intercept usually, and you've got a y-intercept. I'm going to draw a line, a graph here. And we're going to find our intercepts. Now the intercepts are going to be where they cross the axis. And normally we have an x and a y-intercept both. This is our y-axis, and this is our x-axis. So this point right here, that's where it crosses the x-axis. So that's going to be your x-intercept. And intercepts are always ordered pairs. So as an ordered pair, this intercept would be, it looks like 1, 2, comma 0. So your x-intercept is at 2, 0. That's where it crosses the x-axis. We also have a y-intercept. And the y-intercept is up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to be 0, comma 5. And that is your y-intercept. Okay, so that's your intercepts there. And that's what they are. The intercepts are just simply where they cross the x and where they cross the y-axis. Now I'm going to give you an equation. We're going to find our intercepts, and we're going to graph this equation. So we're going to find the intercepts and graph. Okay, so here's our equation. And they want you to find the intercepts, and they want you to graph this equation. Well, whenever we graph an equation, what do we need? We have to have at least 2 points. 2 different points. These could be the intercepts, but if they're the same, then we'll have to add on an additional point. But this one specifically says find the intercepts, so find the x and the y intercepts. We're going to use those to graph. Now, when we talk about the intercepts, we're going to make a table, and we're going to plug in the zeros. So this is going to be our intercept table here. We use the zeros to represent the intercepts. So we're now going to go ahead and fill in this table. And we're going to start by plugging in x equals 0. And that's 3 times 0 plus 2y equals 6. 3 times 0, well, that's 0. Now we've got 2y equals 6. Divide by our 2. And that leaves me then with y equals 3. So that's going to go in this blank right over here. Put 3 here. And what about the other one? Well, the other one, what do we have? We have, in this case, y equals 0. So if I plug in y equals 0, what does that give me? That gives me 3x plus 2 times 0 equals 6. 2 times 0 is 0. That's gone. 3x equals 6. We'll divide by our 3. And now we've got x equaling 2. Okay, those are our intercepts. We're going to label them in a moment. And do we have 2 different points? Yes, we do. Okay, they have to be 2 different points. We're going to do one in a moment where we have to add an additional point because the intercepts are the same. This one, they're not. They're different. I always like to just label the intercepts on the graph. But let's go ahead and graph our line. So what are our 2 points? Our 2 points that we're going to be using, in this case, are the intercepts. We've got, from our table, 0, 3. And we've got 2, 0. Let's go ahead, plot our points, connect them together to graph our line. And then we'll label the intercepts. We'll label what they are. So our first one is 0, 3. So that's up 3 units. And our other one is over 2. Now we can connect these together, and we're going to label them as to which one is which intercept in a second. We're going to go ahead and connect these together here. Now, these are intercepts, and why are they intercepts? They cross the axis. So this one at 0, 3, it crosses what? It crosses the y-axis. So this one, because it crosses the y-axis, would be your y-intercept. This one down here at 2, 0 crosses the x-axis. So that one is going to be your x-intercept. So we've got our intercepts labeled. We've got our graph drawn. And now we have finished this question. So we found our intercepts, and we graph them. Now, when we find the intercepts, what do? That's when we put our zeros in. Now, what do we do if we need to graph a line where the intercepts are the same? If they come out to be 0, 0 on both of them, we're going to have to come up with another point because our rule says 2 points to connect them together. Right? We need 2 points. We can use a ruler to just draw a straight line. If you don't have 2, you're going to have to come up with another one. So let's go ahead and graph and find the intercepts. So we want to go ahead and graph this, and we want to find our intercepts. Well, if we want to find the intercepts, we need to come up with our intercept table and complete it. And that means we put the zeros in. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is when we work it out, we're going to get double zero. So when we plug in x equals 0, then we get y equals 3/4 times 0, which is then y equals 0. And when you get one of them to be 0, the other one's automatically going to be 0, double 0. So if you plug in y equals 0, it's going to give you the same thing, right? So if I use y equals 0, it gives you 0 equals 3/4 x. And the only thing we can multiply times that 3/4 to make it 0 is 0. So we can clear the fractions, just work with it, but we know that x is also going to be what? 0. Now we have a problem. Okay, so what's the problem here? Well, the problem is to graph a line, we need 2 points. And so to graph a line, we're going to need 2 points. So I'm going to add in another point. I'm going to add in another point to our table here. Now you can use any number that you want. Normally I pick it for x, but you could just as easily pick it for y. But I'm going to go ahead and just pick x equals 1. Okay? We're going to use x equals 1. To graph a line, we need 2 points. So I'm going to use x equals 1. That's going to give us our 2 different points. Okay, so we're going to use x equals 1, and that gives us 2 different points. So how does it work when we plug in x equals 1? Well, when I plug in x equals 1, we're going to get a fraction. And that's okay, because we can graph fractions. We just have to be careful when we do that. So we're going to use x equals 1. And that gives you then y equals 3/4 times 1. So that gives you y equals now 3/4. Okay, so we filled that in. Now we have 2 different points. Okay, we now have 2 different points. You have to make sure you have at least 2. Okay, so we now have 2 different points, and those 2 different points are 0, 0, and 1, 3/4. So if you don't have 2 different points, what do? You pick another value for x. Now you can use anything that you want for x. I could have picked x equals 4, and that would have gotten rid of the fraction. I specifically just picked 1 because I want us to see how we graph and handle a fraction. So we've got our 2 different points. We've got 0, 0. Which is right here. That's your origin. That's your 0, 0. And then we've got 1, 3/4. Now, what do we know about 3/4? Well, if we want to try to graph a fraction, we figure out what the decimal equivalent is, and we just kind of estimate where it belongs. So 3/4 as a decimal is 0.75, right? So where is that? 0.75, well, that's in between 0 and 1, and it's going to be a little bit closer to what? 1. Okay? So when we graph it, we don't have to be exact. If we wanted an exact graph, we would use a computer. When we graph things by hand, we try to do the best that we can. So when we try to graph 1, 3/4, that's going to be over 1 and up a little bit less than 1. That's going to be 1 comma 3/4. And I just use the fact that 3/4 is 0.75. And that's close to 1. It's in between 0 and 1. So I said, well, it's pretty close to 1. Now we've got what we need. We can graph our line here by connecting them together. And we still need to find and label our intercepts. So we completed our table. We have our line. And now what are the intercepts? Well, the intercepts are where it crosses the axis. And in this case, we've got the double 0, so that means that both intercepts are 0, 0. Okay, so your x and your y-intercept in this case are both 0, 0 because they cross at the origin. That's the only place that they touch your axis line. There's one more part in this section that we need to look at before we move on to the next one, and that's midpoints. So in Chapter 2, there are a few formulas that we've got to remember, and one of them is the midpoint. We'll talk about slope in the next section, but in this section, we're going to talk about the midpoint. And the midpoint is given by x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. So that's going to be our midpoint formula. So the midpoint is kind of an average. And if we think about it on a map, if I'm planning a meeting and I want to make sure that everyone drives about the same distance, and I've got 2 cities, I would look and see, okay, what's in the middle on a map? And that would be your midpoint. Okay, that's where it is. It's the middle. It's the same distance from the 2 other points. So we're going to go ahead and do a couple of these where we find the midpoint. And I've got to give you 2 ordered pairs. And they're normally called P and Q. So a lot of times they're called P and Q. So we're going to find the midpoint for P and Q. All right, well, to use our formula, what do we need? We need 2 different points, and we're going to label them. We label them x1 and y1 for the first one, x2 and y2 for the second one. Now, what I always like to do when I work with any type of formula is I always like to rewrite it right before I use it. So our midpoint formula again is x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. And now, since I have it, I can go ahead and fill it in. See, I like to write that formula, so I have it right here so I can look at it. What do? We plug our values in. So that's 3 plus 8 over 2. And the y's are going to be 5 and then minus 1 over 2. So we plugged our values in for the x and the y. x1 goes here. x2 goes there. y1, y2. Plug them in. Now we evaluate them down. So 3 plus 8, that's 11 over 2. 5 minus 1 is a 4 over 2. Break down your fractions if you can. So that's going to then break down into 11 over 2. And 4 divided by 2 is a 2. pretty simple. All you need to do is just plug the values into your formula. Works also with decimals. So we're going to do one with decimals, and then we'll work backwards. And I will give you the midpoint, and you're going to find the other endpoint. So let's do one more of these, where we find the midpoint, and then we'll work one backwards. So we're going to find the midpoint for P and Q. Let's say we have P is 1.8, comma minus 2.7, and Q will be 4.1, comma minus 0.8. So if it's got decimals, we just use the decimals. Okay? So what are we doing first? First thing I do is I identify what's happening. In this chapter, the first thing you always want to decide is what formula am I going to use, or how do I approach this question? So in this one, we know we're going to use the midpoint. So I always write the formula down again. It's repetition. You don't have to memorize these, but it does make it easier. And if you write it down multiple times, you'll get to where it's easy to remember the pieces. So for our midpoint, what's our midpoint? Well, our midpoint formula is an ordered pair, and it's x1 plus x2 over 2, and y1 plus y2 over 2. And to use this formula, we need to make sure our ordered pairs are labeled. And we label them x1, y1, x2, y2. So our ordered pairs are labeled. We plug in our values, and then we see what we've got. So we've got 1.8 plus 4.1 over 2. And then we've got a minus 2.7 minus 0.8 over 2. We're just going to break it down. Now with the decimals, we evaluate them out all the way to the end. So we're going to go ahead and just add these together in the numerator, divide to get the denominator. So add them together in the numerator. First one is 5.9 over 2. The second one, those go together, is 2.7 plus 0.8. So that's a minus 3.5 over 2. And we can go ahead and break them all the way down to the resulting decimal. So 5.9, divide that by 2, break it down. That then comes out to be 2.95, and the other one is a negative 3.5, divide that by 2, that's going to be a negative 1.75. So there is your midpoint. And we got that by adding the ordered pairs together and then dividing by 2. Now the next two that we're going to look at, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working backwards. I'm going to give you a midpoint, and you're going to use that midpoint to find the missing endpoint. And by the way, that midpoint formula, just so you have a reference, that's on page 156. So just so you know, the midpoint formula is on page 156 there. Just in case you want to look at it. We've already wrote it down. It's the same thing as what I wrote down, but in case you want to reference your textbook, you can reference it there. Now for the next ones, we're going to do 2 of these, and we're going to be working backwards. So you're going to be given the midpoint. and an endpoint. So you're going to be given the following, and I'm going to make sure that I use the same directions that is used in your homework here. Okay, so you're going to be given the midpoint M. And usually it's a fraction, so you're going to be given the midpoint, let's say, minus 3/2, comma, how about 5/2? So that's your midpoint, and you're going to be given the endpoint. Usually you're given P, you have to find Q. So you're going to be given the endpoint. Let's say P is 3, -2. We're going to have to find Q. Find the other endpoint Q. And Q is going to be XY. So we're going to have to find that other endpoint Q, and we're going to use an X and a Y here for that. So first thing, we need to decide what formula we're going to be using. What are we working with? Midpoint. So we're going to write up our midpoint formula. And midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 over 2, and y1 plus y2 over 2. So I'm going to slow down so we can see how everything goes together. So this is what you're given. Okay, you're given the midpoint. So the midpoint, where is it going to go? All right, you're given the midpoint. It's an ordered pair. So this midpoint right here is going to be replaced with the ordered pair. And what does it get replaced with? Well, what's our ordered pair for the midpoint? Our midpoint is right up here, and that's minus 3/2, 5/2. Is everyone okay with that? So we just plugged in what it is. That midpoint's an ordered pair. Now, when we label our pieces, we go back up to our P and our Q. And one of them is going to be x1, y1. The other one is x2, y2. So I'm just going to call P x1, y1. And Q x2, y2. Oh, so I labeled those. Hopefully they show up all right. I use the blue here to hopefully make sure it's a little bit easier to see. So now we're going to plug in our values. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug in our first piece here. What do we do for our first one? Add the x's together. So what are our x's here? Well, P, our x value is 3. Q, we don't know the x, so we use an x for that. It's x2. And we're going to divide that by 2. And then what about the other one, the y part? Well, for P, what do we know about P? P's y value is a -2. Q's y value is a y. And that's over 2. Now the hard part's done. We just filled it in. And we're going to do 2 of these. Then we'll take a short break. Hard part's already done. How do we finish it? All we have to do is solve for the x and the y. And what do we look at? Well, we look at what's in front of the comma and what's behind the comma. So when we look here, everything in front of the comma is the x part. So what's our x part going to be? Our x part, we're going to list them out. We're going to have to do the x part and the y part separately. So our x part, what do we have? On the left-hand side, we have a minus 3 over 2. What does it equal on the right-hand side? Everything before the comma goes together. So that is a 3 plus x over 1. Over 2. Right? Now, don't try to make this more difficult than it actually is. What do you notice here? What do you notice about these denominators?
They're the same.
They're the same, okay? So since they're the same, I don't even have to worry about them because they're the same on each side, right? We could cross multiply, but since these are the same, they cancel. So the denominators are the same and cancel. Okay, so they're going to be the same and cancel. So what does our equation then look like? Well, it looks like minus 3 equals 3 plus x. Because those denominators are the same, and they canceled out. Now we can finish it. So simply move that 3 over. And that leaves me then with x equaling a negative 6. So that's half of it. We need to get the other half. And the other half is going to be the y part. And what's in our y part here? When you look at our y part, we look at what's behind the comma. So what's behind our comma? Behind our comma is 5 halves. And what does it equal behind the comma? Minus 2 plus y over 2. Okay. What do we know again about the denominators? Are they the same? Yep, so they can cancel. Okay, denominators are the same, cancel. So what does that leave me then with? That leaves me with 5 equals a minus 2 plus y. The hard part's already done. We just add 2 and we're done. So y equals now 7. And so what's our actual answer? We want to find that point Q. So Q is xy. So that means Q is then going to be what? Negative 6 comma 7. And that's going to be your final answer. That's what we wanted to find. So we started with the midpoint and one of the endpoints. We used that information then to find the other endpoint. And it'll either be a fraction or a decimal. So let's work with one that's a decimal now. And then we'll take a short break. Come back and start 2.2. So let's say you're given a midpoint, and let's say that is going to be about 2.5 and a minus 7.5. And then you're also going to be given an endpoint P. Which, let's use, how about 1.8 comma minus 2.3. And we want to again find the other endpoint Q. And Q is going to be x1. So, same procedure. I always like to again begin writing the formula. You know we're going to be finding the midpoint and working with that. So we write down our midpoint formula. And our midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Label your endpoints here. P is always x1, y1. Q is x2, y2. Fill our pieces in. Begin with the midpoint here. And that midpoint is 2.5, comma, minus 7.5. And then we'll fill in the other side as well. So what's the other side going to be? Well, it's x1, which comes from the p. So that's 1.8 plus x over 2. And the y comes from the same ordered pairs. And that's going to be a minus 2.3 plus y over 2. Is everyone kind of okay with what I did here? They're not difficult at all. It's just a matter of remembering where the pieces go and what to do. Solving it is easy. These are very, very simple to solve. So again, I gave you a midpoint, right? We plugged that in. We labeled our endpoint, P, x1, y1. We labeled our other endpoint that's unknown, x2, y2. We plugged it in. Now we'll get our two equations and solve these. So what do our two equations look like? Well, everything in front of the comma is the x part. So what's on the x part here? Everything in front of the comma. And that's 2.5. What does that equal? That equals 1.8 plus x over 2. Don't try to make this more complicated than it needs to be. How do we solve this? Well, we can write this 2.5 as 2.5 over 1. And then we can simply cross multiply, right? Just like that. When we cross multiply, then we've got 2.5 times 2, which should come out to be 5. And that equals then 1.8 plus x. And we can just move that 1.8 over. It is. Okay, now we'll move that 1.8 over with subtraction. And that leaves me then with x equaling now 3.2. So there's your first half. There's the x part. Pretty simple once you understand the basic concepts. Now we repeat the process with the y part. Not much to do here at all. For the y part, what do we have? Similar. We've got minus 7.5 equals a minus 2.3 plus y over 2. Write that as over 1. Cross multiply again. 7.5 times 2, it's negative. So it's going to stay negative, and that's going to come out to be a negative 15 on the left. And 1 times anything stays the same. So that's still a minus 2.3 plus y. We'll add our 2.3 to each side. And now we've got our y component, which is now going to be a negative 12.7. And so what's our answer look like as an ordered pair now? Well, we're trying to find Q, and Q was XY. So that means that Q is now 3.2, comma, minus 12.7. There is your final endpoint there. So is everyone okay with what I did? So I just plugged the values in. I got to my fraction, and they're either going to clear out because of the same denominator or cross multiply to get rid of it. So they're not difficult at all to work through. The hardest part is just setting it up. Once it's set up, it's easy. So let's now go ahead and take a short break, and we'll start back at, let's say, 9:40. So take about a 15-minute break. We'll come back, and we'll start 2.2.